of people kind of like all of a sudden flooded in the streets and started breaking things. And so I called a bunch of friends of mine who were there covering this, and I said, who are these people? I mean, there was this well-publicized death of somebody in Minneapolis, and that was the pretext. But obviously there was something bigger going on here, and I called a bunch of friends who were covering this, and I said, okay, what exactly is going on? Why are they breaking things and setting things on fire and hurting people? And he's like, well, these are avowed Marxists, and they're taking on capitalism. And then allied with them is another group that hates law enforcement, and they're trying to end the rule of law. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Like, radical, leftist, nihilist, whatever, but they have an agenda. They're against capitalism, and they're against law enforcement. Okay, I mean, I'm not, for that, but it kind of made sense. So I watched this thing unfold over the subsequent weeks, and I noticed something really weird. The people who were against capitalism were destroying the smallest businesses in the country. They were going after like pizza places and liquor stores and camera shops, assuming any of those still exist, and dry cleaners and car dealerships. And I was like, okay, I guess that's capitalism, but in 2020 we have bigger examples like Apple and Google. Right? The richest people in the world are capitalists, purportedly. They're the tech monopolies. And not only are they not getting their windows broken, they're funding it. So like, wait a second. How are the anti-capitalist people ignoring the actual capitalists? And then I look over at the other group and they're like, we're against law enforcement. I'm like, all right, well, you can make the case that like not all law enforcement is great. There's the biggest law enforcement agency in America called the FBI. And I think you can make a solid case that, they do good, but they've also, done some things for which they should be deeply ashamed because they were abuses of power, including things that I saw personally. So if you're against law enforcement, I suppose you're going to be calling the FBI to account for its abuses of power. But no. Instead, they went after the beat cop, the guy who's paid $55 grand a year to trudge through the most dangerous neighborhoods in the country, arrest criminals, help old ladies, get cats out of trees, or whatever, like do the retail end of law enforcement. This is a guy who may not have a college degree, who's not making any money, who has precisely zero power in American society, and this guy is the villain. And I began to realize maybe what they're saying isn't what they actually mean. Maybe they're not telling the whole truth about their motives. Maybe the people who say they're against capitalism aren't. Maybe the people who say they're against law enforcement aren't. Maybe this is part of a larger trend where the big things are getting bigger, the powerful are getting more powerful, and everybody else is getting the shaft. Maybe what we're watching is a consolidation of power, and maybe the people who have it are using these forces as their kind of shock troops in order to get what they want. So if you're a huge corporation, you want less competition. Monopoly is what you want to be. And maybe they're paying for these vandals because they know in the end it'll make them more powerful. This occurred to me in like June because I'm stuck. And then I see the numbers. I see the money numbers, which are always like some of the most revealing numbers, but they're the ones we never talk about because somehow that's like irrelevant. Because when everything is political and everything is ideological, you kind of miss the obvious points, which is if you want to know who's in favor of the way things are, look at who's getting richer. And you see the numbers, and you see that Jeff Bezos, who has been paying for this, has benefited wildly from it. You think, wait a second, maybe there's something else going on. So that's a long preamble to the following point. I used to see the world in terms purely left and right. And I was and will remain on the right. But I'm starting to think that's not exactly the way I need to understand what's happening in the world. Maybe it's a matter of the big versus the small, the powerful versus the powerless, the corporate versus the independent. And that's another way to put it. The good versus the bad. People want to think for themselves versus the people who want to demand you think the way they tell you to think. Maybe that's what it's actually about. But then I reassessed a lot of the things that I think are the worst about American society. And I began to realize those things aren't necessarily left-wing values, they're corporate values. So if you're running a company, what do you want? Obedient workers. You want people whose first loyalty is to you, who show up on Monday morning, who work through the weekend, who give you their all, who give you their lives. And in return, you give them a paycheck, but you give them no loyalty and no promise of long-term commitment. It's a continuous one-night stand. You're just hooking up. You're being used. That's true. Contrast that with the relationship you have with the people you love, your best friends, your family, the people with whom you have like sincere, intimate, personal relationships. They're there for you no matter what. And when you get the diagnosis, or you get laid off from your job, or when things turn bad, when you have to wear a mask as you ride your bike, or the world falls apart, those are the people who are there for you. Those are the people. You're freaking me out, dude. This man's whispering sweet nothings to me from the front row. Those are the people who care about you, who actually care about you. They're not the ones who are telling you, oh, we really care about you because of the way you look and we're on your side. These are the people who are actually on your side, who are going to loan you money or let you sleep on the couch or talk you through a tragedy in your own life. Those are the relationships that matter. They're the only relationships that matter, and they're almost never the relationship you have with your employer if you work for a huge company. I'm sorry, it's just true. So what you're seeing, and you see it up and down American society, is the triumph of the values of those people over the values that we hold and that made this country great. You know, your enemy, as horrible as they are, is not some crazed ideologue wearing black spray painting statues. That person is loathsome and should be in jail. Trust me. I call for that nightmare. But your actual enemy is the person who's funding him and making that kind of behavior possible, and is doing it for a very specific reason. To tear down the past, to destroy the past. Now, why do they want to destroy the past? Because when you destroy the past, you eliminate all reference points. If you have no idea what came before you, you have no idea what normal is. And you cannot understand the consequences of what's happening now if you can't look to the past and understand the consequences of the same behavior at another time. Right? The root of wisdom is knowing what happened before. I mean, that's the roadmap. So when you destroy that, you have an entire country that is very easily manipulated. Okay? So the first thing to know is that's what's going on. So if something is enormous, it's a threat to you. Period. Whether it's a giant boulder you're standing under for your Christmas card picture that could topple over and flatten you, or whether it's Google, the largest and most powerful company in human history. Google is a threat to you because it's so powerful. It's a greater threat to you than the US government. It has more power. And it uses it in ways that are hidden, and it is totally unaccountable to you. As frustrating as the federal government can be, and I spent my life raging against it, at least on a theoretical level, you could vote them out. Power from a company like Google is completely resistant to your views. They don't care what you think, and they have no reason to care what you think. Okay? So here's the way I think about it. All this stuff is going on. There's very little of it that we can actually control. Let's just be totally honest about that. By the way, you should always keep that in mind through life. You have less control than you think you do. You didn't control your birth. You can't add an hour to your life. You just can't. No one can. No one's ever been able to. No one ever will be able to. So if you want to be wise and make clear-headed decisions, just remember there are a lot of things you can't control. Focus on the things that you can control. It's like the famous Niebuhr quote. And the thing that you can control is whether your personal life is happy, productive, and has inherent meaning. Period. And no one wants to say that because it never increases their power to encourage you to have a normal, happy personal life. It never increases their power at all. In fact, it detracts from their power because you're going to wind up finding someone, getting married, having kids, and being more loyal to them than to your political or corporate leaders. And that's why they work against it. In fact, that is the main threat to their power. And if you're wondering why big companies across the country are now offering to freeze the eggs of their female employees, it's not because they're compassionate. is because they're demanding that you give them the best years of your life to serve them. That you put off the thing that gives our lives meaning above all else, which is passing on your genes, having children. That's the core meaning in life. That you put that off so you can sell more widgets for them and juice the stock price. And in return, you get what? Nothing. They don't know your last name, but they'll freeze your eggs because we're a compassionate, enlightened company. Yeah, no, because they want total control.